Hello and welcome to part 3 of the Photomanip Insights with the two witches and myself. I'm Jasmin Junge, also known as Kuschelärmel on DeviantArt. Today I'm going to show you how to create believable lighting and depth in your photo manipulations, and I'm also going to add some tips and tricks along the way.
What I very much like to do to get a first feeling for the light that I want to put in, especially glowing light, is to use a layer style and set the inner shadow to color dodge and a very light color, so I can see if what it highlights and maybe go from there. In this case it didn't work out because the light comes from the middle of the two and you can only go in one direction with the layer styles. So what I'm now doing is pretty much doing it all by hand. I'm always picking the color from the background and then going over the parts that I think need some more work. First I go over them on a soft light layer just to get some of the ambient colors into the two witches, and then I go over them in screen mode or in some other blend modes. You will have to do some experiments in what works best, because it's always dependent on what kind of image you are working on. So here in this case I was going for screen, and I'm using the witches layer to clip this color correction and glow layer on top of it. I always use a lot of layers, and this is because I find it hard to fix everything in one go. I think it's easier to do little adjustments at a time, a little bit here, a little bit there, and then just build up on that. So now you can see that I'm starting to add in some greenish glow from the fire. So you can also use it to separate different light sources and colors from those light sources, so you have an easier time of finding them again. Also, it might be a good idea to sometimes label them in the layers palette, so you have a guideline where to look for something should you later find that you need to lower the opacity of something or erase something. So here you can always see that I'm first putting in the lights very harshly so that I see what I'm doing, and then I take an eraser and get rid of most of it again. This is just, well, personal preference, I guess. For me it works really well. As I said, small increments and building up on that, it works much better for me than trying to fix everything at once. Also, it's a lot of trial and error at this point. Even if you have done something a lot of times, lighting is always different and the blend modes react differently to each image that you're going to be doing. So each time is going to be an experiment, and the amount of layers and the layer blend modes that you use, they may vary and you may need to experiment a little. What I do not do on the clipped layers is go over the edges at the end, which I'm starting to do here, and trying to put in some glow, because the glow is going to come from the back as well, and it just looks nicer if you go over the edge a little, and it makes it softer and it makes the image blend better. To make something glow, you need to be sure that it is lighter than the rest of the picture, and for this you also need to take care that everything aside from what is glowing is getting darker. So while you're going over some areas where you want highlights to be, you also need to think about putting in some more shadows, so to make the shadows deeper and to make sure that everything that is not lit by the glow effect is going to be darker, because everything that is very, very light will need a very dark shadow to complement it. For example, what you will be able to see in a second is that I'm going over her arms to make them a bit darker, to make sure that the hands cast some shadow on her upper body, so to give a little bit more contrast. At this point I found that I did not really like the pale look of the background, so I was duplicating the gradient and making sure that it was a bit more prominent. And now to match what I did as a glow effect on the ladies, I used hue saturation on the layer that was responsible for the purplish outline to match up the hue. As the image felt a little static, I took some leaves from frozen stocks to put in, and what I'm doing here is using them in a smart object again and putting them in multiple layers. So I got small leaves in the back, and now I'm going to use the same ones but bigger, a little further toward the viewer, and I'm adjusting them to make them fit. And then I'm going to put in one more layer at the very front, putting it also in the front and trying to figure out where exactly I want it to be. Now that I have positioned them, I can see that it's very, very busy, and to get rid of some of this busyness I'm going to apply a depth of field effect. So I'm going to blur the big leaves in the front more, and I'm going to blur the background and the leaves in the very back as well. The cool thing about using smart filters on smart objects is that you can go back into the filter itself and adjust your settings. So if you find that you haven't blurred enough or that you have blurred too much, you can just double click, go in and change the setting. For the blurring of the background I'm not going to use a Gaussian blur, but I'm going to use a lens blur, which lets me use a mask to determine where exactly it's going to blur, and also it's going to imitate a camera and the depth of field that you get from a camera. As I have already done a depth of field tutorial, I'm just going to leave it at that here and link you to the tutorial in the artist's comment. As with everything, there's a lot of trial and error involved, especially on such filters where you don't quite know where exactly you want them, how much you want them. So this is what you can see here, me experimenting with just how much lens blur I want. Getting some depth into your photo manipulations can be very hard, and it's definitely more than just making some blur into the background and blurring some foreground images. It's also making sure that none of the elements that you are using look out of place, and at the moment those leaves, they look very much out of place, so I'm trying to fix this by adding some gradients again, and in this case I'm actually using them on normal mode to get the contrast down and to make them seem like they're more in the background. Part of the reason why the leaf still looks so much out of place, even though I'm trying my best to amend it, is because they are way too saturated. So I'm going in and changing the saturation, changing the lightness a little, and using curves as well. And now that I have seen that it works on the actual image, I'm putting the two adjustment layers into the smart object to make them appear in every instance of the smart object that I'm using, which is a really, really nice and quick way to clean up your image. Again, I'm trying to use a layer style, but as with the whole of this image, because it's one direction only, it does not work properly, but it will give me an idea of which color I would want to use and how to go about my next steps. So here I'm starting to do everything manually, putting in some different colors and trying to figure out what fits best. Again, I'm color picking from the image itself, and it needs some green from the cauldron, it needs some red-orange glows from the fire, and everything mixed in but not too saturated so it does not look artificial again. So again, with the concept of putting in more shadows to make the lights perceivably lighter, and then the different blend modes and trying to figure out what exactly I want to do. What you can also do, if you feel that you need to make something pop a little bit, is that you use a curves adjustment layer that makes everything darker, and then you go over the mask with black on the places where you do not want it to be dark. So basically you put in a highlight by putting in a lot of shadow and marking the highlight out again. When I'm at this stage, I usually try some different colors again. It's just something that I never seem to be really happy with the way it looks at the moment, so I tend to use color balance layers or something else to make some of the things pop more. I'm trying what about other adjustment layers, exposure or anything else. And in this case I wanted the sides to be darker and just the middle to be light, so this is what the exposure layer is for. So now I'm getting somewhere where I really like the outcome at this moment anyway. So saving the best for last is the actual glow around the witches from the back. So now you can see that I'm really using a blocky brush to put in some glow. I'm going through the blend modes, trying to figure out which I like best, and then I'm getting rid of some of the layers that are in my way and using a smaller brush now, because I found that it did not quite work out. But the color itself, or the idea itself, I liked. So I'm going over everything now with the smaller brush and trying to put in this halo from behind. While you watched me put the last highlights on the ladies, I wanted to say something else about creating some depth in your manips. It is never just one thing that will help you out or work out. For example, in this case you can see that the depth of field is a nice addition, but if that was everything and you wouldn't care about actually blending the leaves in and making them more hazy toward the background, and not just hazy in a sense of blurring, but hazy in a sense of less contrast, then the effect would be not so pronounced as it is now. And another point is to have things overlapping. So for example, the leaves in the front, they go right across the cauldron in part and across the ladies, obscuring some of the view. So you have to be careful what exactly you obscure. But usually what I have found is that some people are very reluctant to put something in the front because it takes away from what they have put in a lot of work so far. And this is of course something that you have to overcome more or less. Just because you put in a lot of work doesn't mean that it's the ultimate thing that you need to keep it. You need to be able to get rid of some things even if you have put a lot of work in it. and putting something in the front that will obscure some of your work is just one of those things. So the last things that I usually do is try to make sure that I have a good contrast and try to fiddle some more with the colors. And then at some point it's just about finally stopping to fiddle and uploading the image. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you on the next installment of one of my tutorials. Bye!